need to
Give it to hold it in.
All right, this is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing our testimony on the FY24 budget. And this morning, we're starting off with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So we have the commissioners here, and we have the secretary of the agency to present their budget. And we have between now and noon to get the budget presentations. I think you know that we try to keep kind of at the higher policy level and what your proposals are. Needless to say, a lot of what we're doing has to do with certainly the housing issue, workforce economic development. So we look forward to your testimony, Secretary Curley. And why don't we start with whatever document that you want. I have this very large document that I really don't want, but we really like to, the summary sheet, and then allow the committee to ask questions as we go along. And we have just barely a quorum. Senator Sears has medical appointments, and Senator Baruth has student appointments, because this is kind of the end of, I guess, the term. And Senator Westman will be coming in a little later, but because we lost so much time last week, we are having to work on Mondays. And if you look at our schedule for the week, you can see it's really crammed. So for anyone listening, we have a lot of work still ahead of us and a lot of decisions. So with that said, welcome, and you can.
So we'll sign into the record. For the record, I'm Lindsay Curley, the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development. As you mentioned, I'm here with the ACCD leadership team today, the commissioners, as well as our Chief Fiscal Officer, Christopher Banning. As you mentioned, we do have a budget book. For my part of the presentation, I'll work off page 3, which is the summary. Looks like this has the pie chart.
Yeah, I have it right
Perfect.
here.
And then the commissioners and Christopher, when he takes you through the admin piece of the.
Should we put that up, or?
They
all have it. Okay.
Whatever it is.
Do you have the document that we're referring to, the highlight sheet, the summary and highlight?
Andrea can probably send them the link if they wanted to.
Okay.
It's on the page. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we get started? The other thing, which if you have time, it might be helpful, is if you can offer any comments about what the House included in their budget, because we're going to have to revisit. And as you know, we passed out a housing bill last week, but as our practice, we strip out the appropriations, and then that way we're looking at everything in totality, including what we did in the BAA. And so if you have any comments that you'd like to make relative to what ended up and what didn't end up in the budget as it was passed by the House, that would be helpful to us as well.
Okay, perfect. So very, very high level, as a refresher, within our agency, we house 3 departments and 1 division. We're actively engaged in activities that generate revenue for the state's general fund. We have the Department of Tourism and Marketing, led by Commissioner Pelham, who I think you will hear from remote. Yep, she's remote. There's a team of 12 that she leads. They are charged with preserving the Vermont brand and marketing for the state for tourism, as well as a place to visit, as well as a place to work and live. Commissioner Goldstein leads the Department of Economic Development. Along with her team of 28, they engage with prospective and existing businesses, problem solving and finding ways to help them to be successful.
I could use a little of that problem solving.
This includes things such as site location, advocating for policy and programs that strengthen the economy, make Vermont a desirable place to do business, connecting businesses with resources to assist them in navigating permitting, and business challenges. She and her team also help identify incentives and funding opportunities available throughout the state, and she can tell you about more things that they do as well. And our largest department within the agency is the Department of Housing and Community Development, led by Commissioner Hanford. 47 employees coordinate and oversee the implementation of the state's housing policy, facilitate collaboration among state housing agencies, and serve as a resource for housing providers to promote the production and preservation of affordable housing for all. This also includes the Division of for Historic Preservation, which promotes and preserves the state's historic sites and historic structures. And then the Division of Administration, which includes 16 employees who generally cross all three departments in the work that they do. This includes a variety of expertise, including legal, financial, policy, communications, and general administrative teams. Deputy Secretary Brooks, who is not here with us today, oversees the day-to-day operations of this team in addition to his role as the agency's Deputy Secretary. And as I mentioned, we have our Chief Financial Officer, Chris Bannon, here today, and he will present the admin portion of our budget. So collectively, that all adds up to a bench depth of 103 talented and dedicated employees. And it hasn't always been this large, at least under my time. We have seen this number at the agency grow over the last 3 years as we have responded to the immediate and the need and radiating economic and housing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Do you have a lot of limited service that were approved in that 103?
We do, and I will, when the commissioners get in the chair, I'll let them tell you where that has expanded and contracted, well, only expanded, I guess, because they have the detail on that in the budget book, and I'll let them talk through that a bit. Really quick before I turn it over, on the right side of the summary sheet, you can see our proposed one-time expenditures. And in the housing and community development area, we proposed 35.7 million in one-time expenditures, and that is a great deal of investment in housing that we feel very passionate about. Feel we provided a variety of programs to really hit the mark there. We feel like we're in crisis, and this is a way that we have programs that are proving to be working right now. And so that's that area. There's a few other items that are a little bit smaller in dollar amounts, but again, as we go through, we can talk about those. As you might imagine, I have to look at my notes here. The House's version does strip some of this out, unfortunately. And again, I think I'll let the commissioners tell you specifically, but I do know with the House version of the budget cuts at least 20 million out of the middle income rental for the revolving.
Which is a new program. Right.
Which is a new program, yeah. So we're obviously going to be pleading for your help on that. So and then in economic development, we have asked for a combined total of just under 30 million, again, to help us with making very important investments in economic development and making sure that we have the tools that we need to not only keep employers here, but to help bring people here and make it an attractive place to do business. Again, a few things that are in jeopardy. Our brownfields program, which is an incredibly wonderful and highly subscribed to, is we're seeing that get a haircut in the House's budget. And again, we have that does great things in terms of cleaning up contaminated sites and setting the table for much needed housing and growth opportunity there. So again, Commissioner Goldstein will talk a little bit more about that. Oops, was there a question?
I don't think so.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody talk. With that, I'd like to turn it over, and I'm not sure who's next. Who in our group is it? Heather.
Heather is next.
Heather, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Pelham and let her present her part of the budget.
Any questions of the secretary before we move on? Okay.
And I apologize, I didn't introduce Jessica Vintner either. She's our legislative and policy director. She's on the line as well today.
She used to be it.
Jane?
Yes, Bobby.
Yeah, I'm wondering, are you, Lindsay, are you talking Are you gonna talk more as somebody about the housing bill?
Oh, yes, Commissioner Hanford is
Yes,
ready to go on that.
Okay, I'll ask questions and on, when we get to that.
Yeah, no, it's gonna require a lot of conversation. Because we did move money in the BAA, 27.5 million to BHCB, specifically 2.5 million for, building out temporary, shelters as alternatives to motel rooms. And then we did put more for VHIP as well. So, and we also put in the 9 million to deal with the, queue of applications. So we actually did a lot in the BAA relative to housings, and it may alter what you were proposing here. But that's a much larger, and then we have all the money we stripped out of the S100 bill as well. So we have housing's gonna be a big topic. And then, of course, there's the 20 million that the House somehow is putting into mobile homes that we don't really understand either. So, and took it out of one time that I think that set aside for childcare. So, and childcare is also a priority, but we're funding our childcare bill a little differently. So, any other comments? Otherwise, we can go to Commissioner Pelham, and then we'll work down through. After that, part of housing and community development, and then economic development. And then the money guy is last. And it all comes down to money, you know?
Should we flip that? Should you go first, or do you feel like you can play cleanup better just fine?
I'll clean up.
Okay, all right. Chris will be cleanup better on this. It'll be great.
All right. The ultimate power.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we go to you, Commissioner Pelham?
Well, good morning, everybody. And again, for the record, my name is Heather Pelham, Commissioner of the Department of Tourism and Marketing. And number one, I really do appreciate the opportunity to testify remotely today as I'm juggling a medical procedure with a family member. So thank you for that flexibility. Just to get us started before we get into, housing and some of the meatier issues, I did want to give a really quick review of tourism. So as Secretary Curley mentioned, we have a staff of 12. That includes 2 positions in the Chief Marketing Office, which serves as a resource for all state government in communications and marketing expertise. And then for the rest of the department, of course, our mission is broadly to support the state of Vermont as a destination for visitation, but also more recently for relocation as well. And again, just to sort of get that context in there, in a typical year, we are welcoming over 13 million visitors to the state. And that generates $3.2 billion in economic activity, which in turn supports over 10% of our workforce. So that's over 30,000 jobs, about the same as we see in manufacturing. And then I would remind folks that visitor economy reaches all corners of the state. So when our visitors are coming here, they're not just supporting our resorts and lodging establishments, but our restaurants, our downtowns, cultural institutions, even the local gas station. When couples choose Vermont as a wedding destination, they're supporting caterers, florists, photographers, and so forth.
Love.
As well as anywhere their guests might want to go. So that tourism infrastructure really supports visitation is part of the fabric of our communities that all of us as residents as well really benefit from and support that quality of life that we all enjoy. So the tourism industry has clearly faced incredible disruption from the pandemic, but we are resilient, as with the rest of the state as well. And I am pleased to say that visitor spending has recovered to past 2019 levels. That said, many of our businesses still face challenges, including workforce. And in the leisure and hospitality sector in particular, jobs are still down 20% from pre-pandemic levels. So that's why our specific budget ask this year focuses more on our role to support relocation in the state, as opposed to strictly visitation. So I can go into that right now, or if you wanted me to go through the ups and downs, I'm happy to do that as well.
Questions on the department's budget? No, pretty straightforward. None of the one-time expenditures at least on this summary sheet, fall into your department. So
That's correct. Our budget ask this year is for a $1 million increase in our base funding. And really what that is, as I just mentioned, is that we're trying to balance supporting both visitation and relocation. And, just like with visitation, our job is to capture attention, we work at the top of the marketing funnel, introduce the idea of Vermont. We need to keep filling that funnel with, new visitors and hopefully potential new residents as well. Right now to tell that story of Vermont, we're really using existing staff resources. We've never had a dedicated budget to do that work. We manage the Think Vermont website, which is where we try to build that brand affinity and provide resources and inspiration. But we don't have a mechanism to really tell the story of Vermont more broadly, including many of the initiatives that make the state so attractive that this chamber has championed as well. We know that remote work is here to stay. So, now's the time, if you can work from anywhere, to think about folks moving to Vermont, to affect that. The workforce crisis we are managing. So, as I said, we have been doing this work with our base budget, but we can only do that in a very limited capacity at the moment. We would be splitting the funding into two ways. So the base increase would help us to do what we do for visitation more broadly for relocation, to get our message heard as widely as possible with basic operational expenses for our marketing type activities. And then the bulk of the money would be going towards grants to local communities who help us as a partner in those efforts. So, we've been doing this work for a couple of years. It grew out of the State to State program, which folks may remember from back in 2018. We've developed this sort of loose regional relocation network. But what we've seen is that relocation networks are really most successful when we can offer individual assistance. So it's those one-on-one conversations to help discuss, there's so many decisions that go into making a move with somebody on the local level, whether it's about finding a house, connecting with a local employer, finding childcare. What are the social networks that are there to support, either BIPOC individuals or, young professionals, anybody who has a particular interest in what moving to Vermont might be like. That can only be done on the local level, and it takes time and capacity. So we're looking for an increase in our base funding to be able to create a grant program for these folks. We've done this on a very limited program in the past, but to be able to provide a way for these partners to be able to take recruitment and retention to the next level.
So that's you have 400 for relocation marketing and then 600 for competitive marketing and support grants.
Exactly. So, and really what that would be, so the two parts are to make sure.
House budget?
Yes, it is.
And it's one time, is that correct?
No, this would be an increase in base.
It's in
and yes, it is included in the House budget.
I had a question.
Senator Perchlik, you had a question.
What was on that? You were just talking about what can I just hear more about what the competitive marketing and regional relocation support grants are? Or I mean, I guess the relocation support grants, but in another place on another page, it just called it competitive marketing grants.
Yeah, I think competitive marketing grants was a bit of a catch-all for when we've done grant programs in the past, but this base funding would really be to support relocation in particular. So I think that was just a language issue that didn't get carried forward through the entire budget book. But one way to think about it is when we get folks to actually come to the Think Vermont website when they want to move here, the way we manage those leads is we have our Connect with a Vermonter form. So folks can say, I'm interested in moving to this part of the state, I'm interested in this type of position, and then we're able to funnel those leads to our local partners. But right now, our local partners have no extra capacity to actually take advantage of those, what I would say are very warm leads about folks who really do want to move here. They are, this is a volunteer network, and they're wonderful, willing partners, but they just don't have the capacity to take this type of work to the level that would really make a difference for us.
Okay. So it's all about the relocation program. That was just my main question.
Yes, it's about
Okay.
the relocation program. Yes.
Thank you.
Having a formal grant agreement would also allow us to have additional metrics and a way to really formalize that relationship so that we understand exactly all the activities that they are providing to folks who want to move here. And that's also to make sure that they feel embedded in their communities when they get here. So I would say this isn't as only just about relocation, but it's also about retention as well. And we'd be looking for a lead organization in each region, whether that, right now we work with a combination of organizations. Some are chambers, some are RDCs, downtown organizations, whoever really has the skills and capacity to do this work on behalf of their region. By providing a grant program, we can formalize that relationship, work with them on making sure that we really have the reporting to back that up as to, what is successful and what is not, that we can build on. And again, it's really it's one more tool to make sure that we are facing the challenges that we have with our workforce, and to acknowledge the work that's being done on the local level.
Well, other questions on that? Obviously, that workforce is permeating every area, every occupational area, and exactly how we address it. I know that certainly the way in which employers are recruiting now with Indeed has changed, certainly, and this gets back, and we'll be talking more about housing, because what we're hearing is entities have people that would come for a job, but they don't have a place to live and can't find a place. So some of the questions I think we'll have is with limited resources where we need to direct them. I certainly understand the value of, and I was just wondering, and last year then, where you've been doing this relocation, how many individuals did you serve?
So right now, as I mentioned, this is a volunteer effort. And so we don't have the kind of data I would love to give you in terms of how many people have been able to help. So, we're able to push leads down to the regions. Right now, we get 50 to 100 leads a month. And, I would say in terms of the housing issues, that there's no doubt of that crisis. There'll be a lot more conversation about that. But making sure that, Vermont stays part of the conversation when people are considering where to move. Folks are moving here and they really would love to be part of our community, but they just don't have that support to make those connections when they're here on the ground. And so I would say this, not only is this activity happening already and will continue to happen, but being able to support them when they get here, I think is crucially important for the future of our state. And if we had more of a formal arrangement, I could give you better than anecdotal of, this family, moved here, this family moved here on, one-offs. And we would have that ability to provide those numbers to you.
All right, other questions? If not, then I guess we're going to move into the next topic, which seems to not only workforce, but housing is permeating all our discussions. And one of the things that, we've talked about here is how we engage our human capital that we have here as well, particularly our youth that are somewhat on the margins of our workforce or need additional training or certificate experience to support the workforce as well. So with that, we've got Commissioner Hanford here for Housing and Community Development. And I think you probably are as busy as you might like. And so if you want to speak to what is being recommended, also link it back to the BAA, and also what any comments you might have relative to the budget that has been passed over to us.
Sure, thank you, for the record, Hanford, Commissioner of Housing and Development. I'd like maybe, if it's okay, just a really quick overview of the basic budget ups and downs as it passed the House, because it did pass the House intact. It was our one-times that were cut. And there's a couple key things in there that I think even in this committee you asked us to address last year. And so our ups and downs start on page 46, I believe. And there was a question about staff and how many, employees we have. The number 46 or 45 right now, there's quite a few limited service. We have 11 limited service positions currently. I remember a time when the department was only 29 staff. So one year we received 5, another year we received 6. These are all limited service from ARPA, and we'll end a few years down the road here to help us manage all the tremendous federal funding related to mainly housing, some other community development programs in there. And so most of our ups are just structural pressures that we can't help, cost increases. We've got an IT project. We have to do a new grants database to draw down our federal funds. But the one base increase I wanted to mention is for strengthening communities in downtowns. So we were asked last year by our downtown organizations. They received no grant or support from the state. And we were asked last year to consider it in both bodies. We didn't have a proposal on the governor's budget last year. We weren't prepared. We spent all summer working on a proposal with them and responded and included that in our base of $800,000 to support the 24. Now there's 24 designated downtowns with Hardwick just being added this past year to help give small grants to support those executive directors of those organizations. The other part of the salary comes from the community, and then also local businesses on Main Street, sort of donations. And it's really been tough for local businesses to sustain these programs and provide that support. But yet we place so much priority on our downtowns, designated downtowns. We have whole grant programs. We have whole tax credit programs. We have all these benefits, and they have been saying for years that they need some consistent support from the state to be successful. And they asked for it last year. You all asked us to consider that. We built it into the governor's budget, and it's an $800,000 base budget up. That's the most significant piece in here.
Let me ask you, with this, we've created these downtown organizations. Now once we create them, they come back for funding. So the 800,000 would go out in grants, or with this, one of the things about grants is a lack of assurance around the stability. So you hire or you create something, and then every year the funding becomes very uncertain. So are you talking about actually some kind of base funding that goes out to support these entities once they've been created?
Correct. So
otherwise, if every year is competitive and you're not sure you're going to get it, it adds tremendous instability.
Yeah, it's not designed that way. They helped us design this as, so we have 5 designation programs, but it's only the designated downtowns, which we've only had 23 for 20 years. We just added our 24th. They're the only one that requires a staff person because it's much more than just receiving a planning designation and walking away. They manage their Main Street businesses, they do events, and so that all
argues for some kind of certainty in funding. So what you're saying is 800,000.
This is a formula that would be divided amongst them so they can all get a fair share.
All right, that's all I wanted to know, because so many times we create grants and you got it for 2 years and then you don't, and if you've got if you've hired some part-time or whatever, or you're funding maybe a part of a position or something.
That's why we put it into the base. So, and then we could reward them equally. Some of them are much more successful raising local money than others. And we have situations where some of these downtown organizations are operating on a quarter-time person and they're barely able to fulfill their goals. Yet we put all the eggs in a basket of this designation. And so we needed, they requested stable, ongoing support.
Okay.
The plan we came up with.
You understand why I'm asking the question, because grants can be a one-off or a two-off, and then once you've created it, then it begs the question. And we're doing a lot. And the reason it's not just here, we're doing a lot with prevention grants. But if you start up programs, and an example, and then it comes back in the form of a budget request for base funding. Right. And so we're getting it for like mentoring, which is a critical prevention program. But if you're only doing, say we're only guaranteeing this for 1 year as opposed to this is a core activity that we want to fund on an ongoing basis and provide at least some predictable level of support. That really is the question, and you've answered it. And I know you're justifying why you are asking for it.
Yeah, and they were making the case that much like our PCs and RDCs that cover regions, this is the local money in the heart of those regions that have been received this designation, statutes that they have to meet for certain responsibilities the state was depending on, and yet the state was paying for none of what they're required to do. And so that was their argument. So happy to move on to bigger picture stuff, but that's the most exciting thing in our base budget and our ups and downs sheet. Everything else is pretty grants going down because we've been spending the money, structural pressures rising our basic ongoing costs for our staff and some IT work. Into the summary page you have there. So I'll mention that under the housing programs, the rental housing development program, this has often been called the missing middle RLF. So it was set up to be a revolving loan fund. It was the one housing one-time support that was meant to be ongoing and leveraged in the future. What we did was we heard from the VHFA, Vermont Housing Finance Agency, which is the largest affordable lender in the state. And they did regional forums, Northeast Kingdom, all over the state with both employers and housing developers. And what they heard was many of these developers are too small. They can't compete with the federal housing low-income tax credit projects, which need to be 30 or 40 units minimum to get built. Those are the ones that often are also supported with the HCB money and a number of other programs. There were many developers and employers that said, if we just had a small gap and we pay it back, we just need favorable interest rates right now. And so this program is designed to do that, to take $20 million of one-time appropriation, turn it into a below market rate lending program with lower barriers to access to target and support the gap to build missing middle rental. It could be mixed with other types of housing, affordable, but that's what was sort of the flagship new program this year. That unfortunately, I think what happened in the House was the treasurer came out with their new 10% for Vermont. They asked Executive Director Maura Collins, "Oh, would you look into that?" She said, "Of course I'll look into that." The next day they passed the budget out of the committee. She then sent a memo afterwards that said, "Here's why that won't work. It's pretty hard to run a below market rate RLF program when you have to borrow the money to begin with. This program is designed on an appropriation that then you can lend below market rate terms between 3 and 30 years with this specific sort of priorities around it for this middle income development and smaller deals. This works really well between the 5 and 20 unit developments. And the money from the treasurer just is a non-starter because they have to offer below market rate terms to begin with. The treasurer money starts at 2% and immediately needs to be paid back. So I believe Maura Collins is asked to come in to this committee and talk about as well how this program really is one of the smartest investments. I think that it's going to be using one-time money that we have because there's a surplus and use it in the future, and this RLF could grow. And it sort of complements all the other affordable housing dollars we put out to the tune of almost $500 million, but 99% of that money has been dedicated to the lowest income affordable housing, not the middle income. And housing is a continuum. When we don't have any opportunity for people to move through that continuum, people that could move out of affordable housing can't find market rate middle income, so can't find home ownership.
I don't believe S100 is it.
S100 has this in it, yes.
They have it in it.
They passed out with 20 million in there for this program. So, hopefully.
All right, so let me ask, this would be your top priority for housing? I mean, you've got 15 million here for VHIP, but we've already put 24 million in total with what we put in the BAA.
The House cut VHIP 5 million. But we did have 5 million in the BAA. I would say that we think that's a pretty cost-effective program as well. If you're looking to get units per dollars, I think our latest statistics will show it's 10-to-1 producing units above the other sort of affordable housing investments. But the top priority is to not see this RLF program be scrapped, because it really has, it's been a tool that's been identified by employers, by the leading affordable housing lender in the state, and has been well received by the smaller developers around the state, including in the Northeast Kingdom. And what we are fearful of is that each of these major employers build their own housing and then are becoming not only, landlords in addition to, employers of tenants. That's just, but they're desperate because they're not seeing the existing tools we have meet their needs. They can't qualify for deep affordability. They have their employees that are, early managers and are out of that above 60% AMI. And then these deals don't pencil out. People think, why can't you build market rate rental housing? Well, if you look at a deal structure, and we have examples in the handouts for this RLF showing an average 10-unit development targeted to rents at 100% of area median income in every part of the state. And what you'll see is there's a 30% financing gap. The bank will literally not lend them the amount of money it costs to build based on the rents that they will charge. And so this sort of middle income market rate housing is not being built. The very expensive housing at the top, single family homes are still being built. Builders can make a profit on those, and then affordable housing is being built because we have public investments, often 100% debt-free or largely 100% debt-free going into the affordable developments. And we have this donut in the middle where it just doesn't pencil out. And so if we don't do something, which this will be a loan, it'll be paid back and carried forward. So that's my pitch. And this was designed by the Housing Finance Agency, worked on with us in the governor's office to put this forward. And it was disappointing to see that the House really didn't take much testimony on this and really try to understand it deeply what the goal was here and how this was a different tool that supports what we're already doing in the deeply affordable space. If there's any questions, what the BAA did.
I guess what I'm gonna ask, and I realize this is probably not out of your agency. You've got some fairly significant one-times here, right?
Right.
Do you want to prioritize them based on what you're asking for? I mean, I don't know what these rural investment and development grants are. That's 10 million. I'm sure we'll be hearing about that.
I think
we got 20, I don't know, as an agency, I don't, you have to, I'm sitting here, we have 400 to 500 million of one-time requests over and above the governor. We've got a budget that came over as presented by, which you're based, your proposals are based on. That included no increases, nothing for our community-based mental health treatment system in a 7% inflationary environment. So I'm just, I realize I'm engaging you in a Sophie's choice, but if you don't have suggestions, then we will do our best. But our judgment may not be what you would say should be number one. So I'm not asking you to do that right now, but you might want to keep that in mind, because I don't know what we're going to end up in terms of, I know the governor, he spent all the one-time money that was available. I've got it right here. It comes to 237 million. As we've kind of evolved here and what we did in the VA may change, and I realized that we did put more money in housing, which was different than what you're proposing here. And the governor was not happy about that because he did not sign the VAA for that reason. So I'm just saying we're going to have to be looking at collectively what we have for money. And I know that the House Commerce Committee also has a workforce proposals that are already included in the budget as they pass it as well. So we are gonna have to try to give all of this, and just because the House did it, doesn't mean that we're not gonna be redoing it. I can assure you on that, in terms of what, makes, the greatest sense in terms of what we think, our priority areas for spending. So, and then the other ones are relatively small in terms of land value tax feasibility study.
Yep, that made it through the House budget. So what?
What is it?
Uh,
Land value, I think of that as current use.
No, this is, City of Burlington has undertaken a study like this, New Hampshire has, a number of other states. It's based on, the way I describe it is every community, if you have this downtown building, right, that's in a prominent area on sewer and water, good broadband, streets and sidewalks, and it sits there unused year after year. And our sort of current property tax system has a disincentive if someone's trying to pay as little tax as possible to not fix up that building. This is to look at a model that other localities are deploying, that in these certain designated areas where there is been massive public investment, you should maximize your building. You should maximize the value, and you should be based on the.
Sort of be getting at the same thing, like looking at the identified areas, which include where you've got the infrastructure.
So this is to base these areas on the property tax based on the acreage, not the value of the building. That the inherent land has a taxable value, and you should be encouraging people to maximize that building and invest in it.
So we can talk about some areas and where you appraise the land separately from the structure.
Essentially, this is that, where you have different carve outs. It's a study. There's been a lot of people advocating for it in some of the other committees over the last few years. A lot of land use planners and others have been advocating for this as a new way to look in certain designated areas where, I know on my Main Street in Randolph, right on Main Street, there's 2 homes. They've been vacant for 15 years. Every year, the owner, his assessed value goes down, and every year he satisfies the tax bill. Those should be invested in. They could be apartments. They could be great. And our tax incentives right now are sort of perverse in that way. They're receiving the same municipal benefit as the neighbor next door, but when the neighbor next door adds another floor, creates value, she's taxed more, and it's sort of creating a disincentive to reinvest in these properties, yet you're all benefiting from the same municipal services. And so it's a study to look at this, to see if Vermont could find a better taxing structure in these developed areas that would encourage reinvestment in your property, not discourage it from a penalty of increased property taxes. I know it's a big, and this is a study, there's a world-renowned gentleman that focuses on this. This has been implemented in several cities across the United States, a couple of countries internationally. The whole state of New Hampshire is doing a study on this. Burlington is doing a study on this. And so it's to look at what we might consider. It's not to make any decisions.
Burlington's doing it. Why don't we take the advantage of their study and then see what more needs to be done? That's our biggest urban area.
I can't comment on where they're at with their study or how that might influence the rest of the state, because I think many would say, well, what Burlington does doesn't mean it's going to work for Lindenville
The concept seems to be the same regardless.
Senator Lyons has her hand up too.
Yes, that's Senator Lyons. Senator Lyons, you're muted.
Thanks. I don't want to go back. My questions arose earlier, but I do have 3 questions. I don't want to interrupt this conversation. It's a good one.
Well, I think we've kind of finished in terms of the feasibility study. Why don't you go back and ask your questions?
Yeah, and I think my question actually related to what you were saying earlier about priorities. With the fund that you were talking about, how does that fit in with departmental priorities and housing priority funding generally? So that's a question I think Senator Kitchell also asked, probably in a better way. But my other questions are, we were talking about workforce and drawing workforce into the state, and also about having different types of workforce, middle income, middle worker housing. what are you hearing from folks who are interested in moving to Vermont about the type of housing they would like to have? Because I know that can have a significant effect on whether or not we see workers moving into the state. So are you hearing anything about their desire or the type of housing they'd like to see? Do they want something in the country? Are they looking for the downtown condo? Because we've put a lot of efforts into our housing programs for consolidated development, and I don't know if you're hearing anything different from that.
Great question. And that's just it. We're not building the type of housing that the new family, the new downsizing folks need and want. You know, we have the oldest housing stock in the country.
I know, and I own most of it.
And what we've heard is a concept design of missing middle housing design, which are duplexes, triplexes, small condos, both in downtown, in villages, and also some areas with some more space. And I think what's missed is over the last couple of years, you're right, we've invested hundreds of millions, $500 million into housing development. But that is all housing development, rightly so, because of our desperate need and the emergency housing situation targeted to those below 60% of area median income. So exiting folks from homelessness, folks that qualify for federal low-income housing tax credits and Section 8. So
let me just clarify that, because I thought certainly we want affordable, and we've got perpetual affordability as one of our policies. But when we've been doing, for example, the New Avenue Hotel, there's a number of units that are for lower income families that might have Section 8, but they also have market rate. So when you're saying it's built mostly, but that money has been used for addressing housing for lower income, can you explain that relative to the fact that we're trying to do mixed housing with market rate units so that we don't have that failed experience of a concentration of households that are, of one single socioeconomic and educational kind of characteristics?
So New Avenue, for example, is largely a tax credit. It's probably 70, not 80% low-income housing tax credit, which maxes out at 60% AMI. And there's a little bit of money, probably 10 units in their max. It was funded from the original housing revenue bond, which required 25% of the units to meet 80 to 120 AMI. And that was specifically dedicated, that was the governor's requirement to get on board with those funds. So you have to have funding dedicated to go above those tax credit units. Otherwise, they don't pay for themselves. That's the same design as this RLF. You know, the affordable units funded with VHCB and low-income housing tax credits and some of the CDBG money all require the funding below 80% AMI, most of it at 60% AMI. And so to actually get the goal of mixed income housing, there needs to be another source to fill that gap, because they can't charge the rents high enough to cover the construction costs and the debt. And so many of these programs, like over here on Taylor Street, that is 95% low moderate income. New Avenue, I can get you the numbers, but I think you would be surprised that there's maybe a few at that 80%, but they're not going to 120, 150 for a fully integrated mixed income property, which is the gold standard for housing development, especially in a dense environment, to have a mix of incomes. Our downtowns need vibrancy. They need all types of incomes and families living. And so it's been an area, rightly so, with the crisis we've had, to really focus on those that are most vulnerable, most needed. And we've put historic levels into those programs. But with the exception of last year's missing middle home ownership funding, which was 15 million, that 500 million was for families below 80% of area median income. So that was the first step into this missing middle last year. And that was for home ownership. This is for rental. We need to have both, and the market is not working. This is hopefully ongoing and temporary. Market rate housing should pay for itself in normal times, but right now they're underwater and they're not getting built from the dynamics I'm talking about.
Senator Westman's got his hand up. You're muted.
So the first question is, it's hard to figure out what exactly is needed, and what background material do you have to that kind of leads us into what's needed. I would say in my community right now, it's 1 and 2 bedroom units because people, our own people, their kids can't get out of their parents' house to move into something. And, but it's hard to.
But we want multi-generational, Senator Westman.
Yeah, well, you know, by the time they get to 30, they want to get out of their parents' house. And there's no place to go. And I would say right now, with the banks charging about, you know, you're going to be in the 6.3 to 6.4 range to get a construction loan and a mortgage to hold that 3% that it's up over the last couple of years is crippling people. But I can't, from what you are telling me, figure out what exactly is where the pressure point is and what people need. So what background material do you have?
Sure, can get you, there's a 2-pager that describes this program based on these regional interviews with employers, home builders, and others that sort of ground this program from what people said they need, because our current housing funding doesn't provide something like this. You either qualify for a low-income housing tax credit or VHCB, which doesn't allow you to have the types of units that I think we're hearing that most employers want, like the vice president in hospitals, others that have been searching for a home, and they're stuck in an apartment when they could be homeowners. They would love a condo. They would love a duplex or a triplex that's 1 or 2 bedroom, conveniently located. Those deals need a lot of capital up front, and the banks simply, there's a gap of what they would be willing to lend a development like that, and something like this, an incentive that the state could offer to see it happen. We've heard everything from don't stop building 3 or 4 bedroom. You know, we have large families too, especially some of the new American families. We're getting asked to do that in certain parts of Vermont. But also the market is clearly, we need 1 and 2 bedroom because our family size are shrinking.
I hear you anecdotally talking about business. What background material do we have to, so we get a better picture of the need?
We can get that. This program has a whole program design behind it based on talking to the builders, the employers that we're asking for a fund like this because they're going to build the housing themselves.
So is there regional, I guess, is that part of your question, Senator Westman, in terms of?
Is it regional or regional? Is it in the total, you know, the housing bill that just passed, the House, they talk about needing 40,000 units. What's the breakdown on what is needed within that 40,000? I don't get a big picture view of what that is. And I, you know, quite frankly, I get what builders would like to do. I probably shouldn't say this, but I just got off the phone with my bank because I'm building a duplex this summer. And I know where the stumbling blocks are in putting that together. But what I don't hear from you is hard and concrete. What do we need and where?
Sure, we could get that. The House Committee on Economic Development and Housing had over 100 witnesses in. They had many of these builders and developers and businesses from all regions of the state describe this need and support this program on record, which has a design that allows for flexibility by region, allows for different needs across the state. It's suffice to say we have a need in every sector, in every size, at every income, to both meet the existing demand, bring up the vacancy rate because it's so low, provide some inventory for home ownership, you know, some inventory to buy homes, It's everywhere, but there is some very granular data, both behind that $30,000 to $40,000 figure, as well as this program design. And I would encourage you to have Vermont Housing Finance Agency in, who runs the housingdata.org, which we funded, which is the state's housing database that has more volumes of information on this housing data that you would probably care to look at in summaries around how programs like this and others are working and why they're needed.
Well, I think if any kind of background, because we hear these figures, and I know that the housing folk, regional housing folk, were talking about that, you know, we need they need another 175 million. Where did that come from? How many units? It's kind of a sense that we hear, you know, there's tremendous need, but in order to sort of get a sense of how that need is being defined and experienced, I think is what Senator Westman is saying. What is behind what we're hearing, and why, out of the various ways you can make investments, why are we?
Let me make a quick pitch for these two that are here in our proposal.
Well,
Their
I'm sure you would.
Their going rate for affordable housing development is over $500,000 per unit now. That's for an apartment like a New Avenue or Taylor Street or Morrisville downtown apartments or others. That's what it's costing. And when we do it through only the traditional systems we have, we're paying 100% of that. This RLF or VHIP are putting in about $50,000 to $100,000 max per unit to create the same unit. That's the difference. We have to have multiple
It's true.
tools to get there.
It's true, and we know that a lot of those downtown rehabs are very expensive because they're historic buildings, and we're doing more than housing. We're actually
It's community development.
It's a community,
Absolutely.
right?
And it's brownfields, it's a big.
So new construction probably is the cheapest compared to these historic rehabs, particularly buildings that have been neglected for decades and just bled, and that, you know, and then they're kind of, all you're buying is the carcass.
They're very expensive to rehab, and they need some investment and the state to participate, especially in a housing crisis. I think the BAA letter from the governor expressed the exact concern that we're in. We're spending so much of the one-time money before you've even debated the new policies and new programs. And then now there's new programs in front of you. And I really think that your members of Senate Economic Development, Housing, General Affairs, they debated all these programs. They had many witnesses, and they supported every one of the governor's proposals in the housing field. And be happy to come back and talk about any of these in detail. But before we run out of time, I do want to mention another cut that the House budget has. It removes the $117,000 for the Vermont's 250th commission. It's a small budget line item, but that's for us to participate with all our regional states to plan for and celebrate and have good events for the 250th anniversary. And so, that obviously is a challenge for us to not have those resources to participate along with our other New England Northeast states. But the other component state, the House Ways and Means, Appropriations, and the committees of jurisdiction really like that land value feasibility study. And then obviously the teeny rural development match there, that was supported, as well as the municipal and regional planning fund. That was embedded in the housing bill, S100, as the new money to help the municipalities meet these new zoning requirements. They actually raised that to $750,000, I'm pretty sure, in the S100 as it passed out of committee. So there's a lot here, and we could talk about housing all day, and I can come back with facts and figures and reports and dive into any question you have if you'd like. But I think staying high level as you requested, I think happy to take any high level.
So we'll have to see if we can schedule more calls to come in as well, because she's made that request. And it does tie into your proposal on the rental housing. So, other comments? Any? Yes, Senator Starr, you're muted.
Good morning. Hey, I was wondering on the S100 bill that we passed the other day, are the figures still accurate in the document, the one document regards to like 25 million, we're putting into housing, at VHCB, or 20 million for rural rental housing improvements. Did that bill the other day affect any of, those, programs and projects?
Great question. My understanding is no, it did not. Your committee sort of removed the appropriations from each of those programs, set them aside to look at the big picture. But the bill, even after the compromise language that was passed, did not change or remove any of those programs. So the governor's budget had about 24.5 million for VHCB between the various sources. Plus there was the 27.5 in the BAA. And so, I think there's a lot of money out there for housing and a lot in the GA homelessness temporary assistance space too, that I'm not sure how you could calculate what is housing and what is supports and services and just temporary housing that's not development housing. We play in the development of housing space, both, planning, implementation, policy, and a lot of the money in this bucket is sort of on the health and human services side. And I don't know how people are quite marrying those numbers up and saying what is housing, what isn't housing. That's a bigger discussion, and I'm not prepared to talk at all about AHS's requests and their budgets. They obviously relate. We've been spending a lot of money in this space between the two sort of programs. But Senator Starr, the one thing I will mention is, when we first started and Governor gave his budget proposal, he talked about this $500,000 being the planning funding as being maybe the most important dollar amount in here for housing. Because if we can't enable an easier path to build housing that requires less time, less costs, less appeals, this money we're spending, we're just paying ourselves with fees and permits.
Did the house include that 500,000 there?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But the point is about the cost of development and what we do to get in our own way of the housing that we all desperately need to build, I think is somewhat unresolved from the bill as it left the chamber, in my opinion.
Well, we're gonna have to kind of crosswalk what is in the House budget, what was in S10, S100, and what is being proposed here. And
Right.
I guess there'll be a lot of discussion around that. I think that was 80 million that we pulled out?
It was 85 million. The housing piece of the bill, and then there were a few other studies and things in the S100. It's on our list now.
So it's all on our list, so we're coming back.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna suggest we move on, because we're marching toward noon and we still haven't gotten to economic development. And much less the financial. Although, are you doing the financial, the administration?
Yes, I am.
Up and down?
Which will be brief, so,
Yeah, it probably is.
yes. So please use the time where you need it.
All right, so,
Joan Goldstein, Commissioner, Department of Economic Development. Since you brought it up previously, I might as well start writing with this new program, unless you want me to review something else. But the Rural Investment and Development Grant of $10 million is a new program. The idea is that we need industrial space in the state, a combination of growing businesses around the state, as well as the recruitment initiative from Canada has left us with the idea that we really don't have available space for them. Both, that matters up at the Canadian border, but it also matters elsewhere, places like Europe. So the idea would be, could we use this fund to encourage or help the RDCs purchase either land or develop that land into a sort of site readiness? Some states call this a site readiness fund. In places like Plattsburgh, they already have existing buildings. There are times when we are competing and we feel we would be at a disadvantage. It leaves Vermont vulnerable if we do not have the available industrial space for our businesses to grow. We asked for $10 million, House approved $5 million. Any questions, or should I move on to the next?
No, I'm just noting.
Okay.
A lot of our industrial parks, actually, there were private developers. I think Bobby Miller was one,
Yes.
did quite a bit, but that's not happening now.
It's not happening now. There is a program through VITA where an RDC could borrow up to 90% of the appraisal value of as complete building. And typically what has to happen is you have to have the tenant lined up to get that 10% down. So we need a flexible fund where that could happen. The other example is RDC's own industrial parks. And they may have property, but they need to bring infrastructure to it, or they need to get it master permitted. And NBRC is one funding opportunity, which is great, but they also need match money to match the NBRC fund. So again, this flexible pot of money could go a long way toward making these sites more ready. So we're not telling a prospective, either existing business or a new business from Canada, we could build this for you, but it'll take 2.5 years, right? So that is the thought behind it. We also thought that in many cases, the RDC could act as transitional owner and then sells it to the growing tenant. And when they sell, we would want those funds back so that we could have a revolving sort of grant program to continue this effort. Okay.
Questions? Hard to remember that the rest of the committee is on.
Yeah, I'm talking to you.
Working remotely.
Can I, is it just how about, or does it relate at all to any of the brownfield redevelopment money?
It's separate. Yeah, I'll go into brownfields next, if that's good. So the idea behind the rural investment and development grant is for clean, we'll say clean properties that don't necessarily need the redevelopment of brownfield.
Now, so you're talking about, you would be talking about areas of the state other than Chittenden County.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're targeting here?
Absolutely. Particularly, most of the demand from Canada, they usually want to be in Franklin and or Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, they do, because of the, well, it's good transportation systems. You've got the interstate and you've got a rail.
Yes,
Which northern New Hampshire does not have.
yes,
I'd like to make a point.
it's great.
Northern Vermont has actually got a very robust transportation network. At New Hampshire,
Yeah.
north of Littleton, there's nothing. So, and there is a great desire to have a US presence
Yes.
because of the contracting provisions.
Yes, that's correct.
Senator Lyons has her hand up.
Yes, Senator Lyons, your hand
Yeah.
up.
Am I unmuted? Yes. Thank you. As I'm listening, you're talking about industrial parks. And I know that when you say industrial, it raises different images in different people. Could be a gravel pit. It could be a set of buildings as Franklin County has, or as we have in parts of Chittenden County. And I know also that during our Act 250 Growth Center discussion, we identified several, it was over 100 industrial sites or parks in the state, some of them very tiny and some of them larger. So I'm just wondering what you have done to identify where some of this development might be possible, and considering what Senator Kitchell has brought up around transportation, I think is absolutely key to ensure access and then communication if we're getting a product developed. So just questions
Sure.
there.
Absolutely. We did a bit of a survey around the state, and we came up with a demand of about 1.1 million square feet that's necessary and then we're combining the existing businesses throughout the state that are poised for growth as per RDCs, who typically get engaged in the site selection opportunity and search. And then on top of that, the prospect list that we have from the Canadians about the type of space that they need, how much they need, and they usually identify the where. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in an industrial park per se. It could be an industrial building where there may be other industrial buildings. Not all of them are kind of designated as such. So we have Brattleboro was a key area of demand, as was Franklin County, Orleans and Caledonia. And then it's a variety around the state, like Windsor somewhat. Like there are some areas in the state that have industrial capacity, like Bennington, but in many cases, the Canadian companies they want to be able to make it there and back to their US presence within a day. So, we think that this fund wouldn't be used by every single RDC, but in the specific areas where there is not already existing building capacity for them to move into. So hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you.
We'll move on then. I don't see any hands up.
Okay, so related but not, but separate is the brownfields ask. And so we're asking for $10 million of general fund.
How much have we put in over the years?
Yeah, so the first year that we asked for this for state money, it was $11 million ask. Second year was 6 months, so 17 million so far. And then this will add another 10 million, so it'd be a total of 27 million.
And we had that whole issue around the role of the
RPCs for the assessments, yes. So of that 27 million asked, I think 1 million from the first round was already appropriated, and through BAA, another million will be sub-granted to them for
any of
assessment.
that 10 million go to our RPCs at this point. This 10, you're
on this 10. I believe there's legislation afoot, and don't ask me where it is, but about directing us to sub-grant funding to the RPCs for assessment. I think that was Carrie Dolan's bill.
Well, because last time that couldn't be done.
Yeah. The other thing that was put in terms of legislation was to ensure that the notwithstanding language carries forward. And what that does is it allows us to pay a developer, somebody who's going to do something with this, over the current $200,000 cap that we have within the state brownfields legislation. Many of these sites are very dirty. To give an example, the average grant has been $1 million. So
where's the notwithstanding language?
It is with this, I believe. I believe it's with it in the.
I'll double
Did
check
they
this with this, but
notwithstand
in the past, it has come with the money.
Yeah, okay, with the money, and then it didn't the prior year, and that's why we had troubles with doing larger projects with the 6 million that was appropriated. So we want to do the same for this pot of money. House has approved a budget with 8 million instead of 10 million.
All right.
I'll go on to the next unless there's another.
Yes, I think we should.
Okay, the other is a one-time ask for Vermont training program, and that one-time ask is 5 million. And just to, Vermont training program is an existing program, as you know. We usually pay up to 50% of the cost of the wage while the person's being trained. This has a little bit new twist in that this money is really meant as a set aside for the CHIPS funding. So the Federal CHIPS Act that semiconductor manufacturers will apply to the federal government this year for either new development or a renovation of an existing fabrication facility. They need to show, as they apply for this, they need to show state and local support in the form of incentives. So our take on that is we would prefer to give the funding or promise the funding contingent upon them receiving the CHIPS funding for employees to get trained, cross-trained, whether they're new or incumbent. So this is why this is.
Is there a limit on the CHIPS funding that needs subject to match?
They don't qualify it by saying a specific match. They just need a commitment letter from the state government saying we are prepared. Some states already put into statute incentives, specific incentives. We thought, let's do this around workforce development. It's more powerful and it's better for us to.
In the House, did they include it?
They included it, yeah, at the full ask.
And then the Innovate Northeast that
You took care of that in budget adjustment. The other ask is the new and relocated workers grants. That is the payment of $5,000 or $7,500 for people who move here to take a job with a Vermont employer or who move here and are working for their existing employer outside the state. The House did not fund that at all.
All right. Questions, anyone? Yes, no. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Obviously. We can't touch.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so now we're down to Chris. And the last one standing.
But not least.
That's right. And then you can mop up or correct anything that's been said. And you're doing the administrative budget.
Yes, I am.
Which probably is mostly your uncontrollables that have to do
Yes.
with ADS, fee for space,
Yes.
benefits.
Yes,
That's it.
that's pretty much it.
Okay.
So Christopher Benning, Chief Fiscal Officer for Agency of Commerce and Community Development. As you said, we do have some upticks in salaries, retirements. We did have some vacancy savings. There was an uptick, 17,000 for internal service fees and workers' comp.
Mhm.
Our vision and insurance went up 39,000, and we did have some money set aside for marketing.
So it's all netted out to just an increase of 160,000.
Yes.
You just don't want much, do you?
Well, we don't ask for much.
No, no.
So that's pretty much.
Well, we're very familiar because every department or agency has those same experiences in terms of their personal services. So nothing that jumps out here that I can see. Maybe anything here, I mean, they're just the standard, they're cost allocated and you just have to pay the bill.
Yes.
So, I don't know, I think we might be back on track.
Wow.
Oh, geez.
right.
We were behind, now we're ahead. Thanks to you. Oh, great, appreciate it, and we'll obviously have a lot more discussion on, the overall agency budget. Probably not your admin, because
And I can I'll have send the committee the overview of the housing RLF.
all right, and how does that fit with the 175 that we got from?
It's got 175, to be honest, they never asked us for input, I don't know what that was proposed to be.
And how many units?
How many units, I have no idea.
I just figured it out, if that was floated out, that's what it would take.
I mean, if that's what it's take, why did it take us 450,000, we haven't achieved the goal, so I think it was just a number, recognizing we have a lot of housing to still build, and that I don't think it, and it talked about ARPA money still, I don't know if there's any ARPA money to reallocate. So I can't ask you where they came, answer your question where they came up with that.
Takes on a life of its own, let's stop there.
Yes.
Committee, we are next, did we ask them to come in at 12:15?
I did, but I never heard back from them, and they're all gonna be on Zoom, so as soon as they join.
Okay, so committee, we have 8 minutes. I'm gonna suggest we just take a break.